Today, we're diving into a really dangerous pattern in political speech. We're going to explore how just one single word can have the power to shift our entire perception of what democratic debate is all about.
All right, so we're going to start with one specific, documented quote. And the reason for this is not to focus on the person who said it, but to use it to understand a much broader and, frankly, more powerful mechanism that's at play in our language.
Okay, so here's the quote. Documented by Reuters, this statement is going to serve as our central case study. The language here, this is our starting point for digging into a very specific rhetorical strategy and its potential consequences.
So when you hear that, you have to ask, right? Is this just tough talk? The kind of thing that just happens in heated political moments? Or does this kind of language actually fit into a recognizable and historically pretty dangerous pattern?
Now, before we go any further, I want to be really clear about something, because the source material is very explicit on this. This is a scientific analysis of the rhetoric. We are not making a direct comparison between historical figures. Instead, we are focused entirely on the method, the technique of using language in this very specific way.
All right, so let's get into the core concept here. It's all about this deliberate, strategic shift in how political opponents are framed, moving them from one category to a totally different one in our minds. In a democracy, you have opponents. You compete with them on ideas, and their role is seen as legitimate, even necessary for a healthy system. But this kind of rhetoric, it creates something else entirely, an internal enemy. See, an enemy isn't a debater. They're a threat that must be removed. Their actions are framed not as politics, but as sabotage, as treason. And that distinction is absolutely crucial. It's not just a difference in intensity. It's a fundamental difference in content. So, how does this actually work? Well, a tool called frame analysis really helps here. The specific choice of the word vermin completely reframes the entire context. Suddenly, we're not talking about a political debate between citizens anymore. The conversation has been shifted to one of hygiene, of pest control, of eradication. And this just brilliantly shows how one little word can change absolutely everything. Now, let's zoom out and see how this fits into a recognizable historical pattern. And again, just to be super clear, we are not comparing people. We are examining a recurring mechanism that has been used by totalitarian systems throughout history. This mechanism, this playbook, it follows a very clear pattern. First, the whole idea of a legitimate opposition is just erased. It's gone. Then, anyone who disagrees gets relabeled an enemy of the people. These so-called enemies are then said to threaten some pure, mythical, national community. And finally, to make the removal seem logical or even necessary, the language of disease, of parasites, and of vermin is used to dehumanize them. And look, this isn't just a theory. This has proven psychological effects. A ton of research shows that when people consistently hear dehumanizing language about a certain group, it lowers our natural inhibitions. It actually makes the idea of violence against them seem more acceptable, more legitimate. The rhetoric is directly linked to real-world consequences. So, if that's the pattern, how can we spot it when it's happening? Let's shift from just analyzing this to actually empowering ourselves with a toolkit to identify this kind of rhetoric in the present. Okay, here are 3 key warning signs you can watch out for. First, listen to how the opposition's being labeled. Are they being described as unpatriotic, sick, parasites, or pests? That's a big red flag. Second, notice how institutions are being treated. Are those essential checks and balances, like the courts or a free press, being attacked as enemies of the people? And third, is there a push to replace established law and procedure with the personal will of a single leader? Recognizing the pattern is the first huge step. The next is figuring out what can actually be done to counter it, to defend the norms of democratic conversation. The source material suggests 3 really concrete strategies. The first is what it calls democratic speech hygiene. This means we can and we should have fierce debates about policy, but we draw a hard line at dehumanizing the person we're debating. The second is about strengthening our institutions. The media and schools have a huge role here in teaching people how to analyze language and to see these frames for what they are. And finally, there's everyday civil courage. In our own conversations, we can refuse to accept these terms, we can ask for data instead of insults, and we can be the ones to consistently reinforce the idea that having an opposition is a normal, healthy part of democracy. And really, it's as simple and as profound as that. In any functioning democracy, opposition isn't a disease to be cured. Opposition is normal. It's the engine of progress and our best safeguard against tyranny. And so, we'll end with this final question from our source material.
When political language starts talking about rooting out or eradicating groups of people, even if it's meant as a metaphor, what does that actually mean for the safety of real human beings? It's a powerful reminder that words are never, ever just words. They build the world we live in, and they can absolutely set the stage for what comes next.